Good morning, everyone. How we doing out there in Final Cut TV land? I'm glad everybody could make it today. Let me get some things straightened out here. It's a normal fall day on the east coast of the good old USA, that's for sure. Leaves have almost completely come down, which is a little bit early, usually after Thanksgiving, but this year they're down pretty much 80%, 90% down. Got our first comment from our friend I Know Buddy over there on the X platform. We've already got thumbs up. We appreciate those good old thumbs up. What do they call it for the you're feeding the algorithm on YouTube, which whatever that monster is, the algorithm monster, we're feeding that monster on YouTube. So we got some, we're going to talk about a few things this morning. Good morning, all snow in Canada, Hanoi, in Canada. Wow, that's early. Isn't it early? I think it is. Let's look at the backyard. What's going on in the backyard? Not much. Let me see what's going on in the backyard. I'm going to brightness, gamma, change that a little bit more saturation. There we go. That looks about right for the Final Cut TV backyard. I did the leaves this morning, actually. I actually collected leaves this morning, took the blower out there, blew them all away from the trees to make it easy to get to. Then I have a 0-turn lawnmower, Cub Cadet ZT150, 50-inch deck, and it has a big vacuum system, a cyclone rake vacuum system on the back. It's a big hose, I don't know, 10 or 12-inch hose. It sucks them all up into the back, and then I have to bag them all up to do that stuff. Your garden looks like a big snowstorm, then all melt away already. Well, the garden's done for the year, except for a few little stragglers. I think peppers are still coming in. We haven't had a real frost here yet. That's usually when it kills things, but yes, indeed it does. So we're just waiting on a couple things. First off, let me just see. First off, we're going to be talking some of the people that are a little older, that have been around Final Cut for a long time. We're going to talk about Ken Stone, who had the best Final Cut Pro website of anybody. But that was mostly classic Final Cut Pro, Final Cut Pro 7 and before. He did some stuff with Final Cut Pro 10, but everything changed for him. He was retired at that point. So I started a podcast, the Final Cut Pro radio podcast, probably, I don't know, 2013, 2014, something like that. And Ken Stone was the third person that I had on. The first person was Sam Messman, because I knew Sam. The second person, I'm not sure who it was. And then the third person was Ken Stone, who I wanted to get on the podcast, because I really was I admired his website and stuff. He didn't accept any advertising on his website, no advertising. And most of the articles were on Final Cut Pro Classic, Final Cut Pro 7, but he did delve into Final Cut Pro 10, and then it kind of died off at that point. But anyway, we'll get to that in a little bit. We had an update to Compressor on Thursday. An update to Compressor? What do you mean? What's Compressor? When nobody pays attention to Compressor. But I guess the team had an update. They had to get out on Thursday. Why Thursday? No idea. Let's go over there and see. I mean, why just compressor? I guess that's what I mean. Why not the whole suite of things? But for some reason, let's look at this. Here we go. For some reason, that was the only thing going on there. Let me, let's see. What do I want to do? Well, I'll just put it down here. I will put it down here, and then we'll have a look and see what's what with the update for compressor. And then we'll see what is what. Here we go. So this is, 1 second here, turn this off. Turn this on, there we go. So this is compressor that was updated by itself on Thursday last week. I mean, can I even see what the heck this is? Compressor integration tightly with Final Cut, blah, blah, blah. Oh, it just says Compressor 4.11.1 includes improvements and bug fixes. Improvements and bug fixes, really? Well, that's a lot of information for people that want to know. Apple, you're a little stingy with that information. You certainly could give us more. What improvements? What improvements? What bug fixes? Why are you afraid to tell us what the heck the improvements were and the bug fixes were? These kind of statements are just ridiculous. Includes improvements and bug fixes. What the heck? Are you getting paid by the letter? Is that what it is? That you want to be as concise as possible? But it's 4.11.1, and it's the only thing that came out by itself. It came out no Final Cut Pro bug fix, no Motion bug fix, no Logic. We haven't heard from Logic for a long time. Very unusual. They must be cooking something up with Logic that they haven't done anything for a long time. Usually Logic is updated on a fairly regular basis. Bug fix or feature, no feature, just bug fix. Why the Final Cut Pro team doesn't put out naming similar like Final Cut Pro 11.2, Motion 11.2 plus Compressor 11.2, I don't know. That's like the generic app release note, bug fixes, performance improvements. Yes, they can't tell us that. They can't tell us anything more than that. That's next to nothing. That is next to nothing. We deserve, as users, to know more than improvements and bug fixes. Well, you didn't improve your description of what you're doing, that's for sure. It must not have been that much. But I don't know why it had to come out on Thursday. Why did it have to come out last week? Was that important? Maybe it was. Maybe it was. So I'm still thinking we're going to see Final Cut Pro 11.2.1 before the end of the year, which once again is a bug fix. I don't expect anything else. And then in the spring at the Creative Summit, I expect 11.3, which should be a bigger update with new features, etc. Text-based editing, roll-space audio mixer, those would be gigantic. When you launch Compressor in what knew something about raw extension among infos? Okay, raw. So ProRes raw extension, something for Compressor now, I guess. So here's the deal with Final Cut Pro, with ProRes raw. I like it a lot. I use that more than I did just ProRes. you have more controls. You have a floating HUD window in Final Cut. You can move it anywhere you want. That has basic controls to ProRes RAW. That's the first time Final Cut's done that since the beginning. They don't have floating palettes. This is the first one. So does that mean that's forthcoming? We're going to get more floating palettes going forward? I hope so. I'd like to see the inspector be a floating palette, because if I'm in the timeline and I want to change something, I got to go all the way up to the inspector to change it. Or if I'm in the browser and I click on something and I want to make it change, I got to go all the way to the other side of the screen to get to the inspector. I would rather stay in the browser, right click, choose what parameter I want to adjust, and adjust it like a little, either a drop down menu or a HUD there. So ProRes RAW is a floating HUD. It's a floating palette. Move it anywhere you want on the Final Cut Pro screen. This is the first time I've seen that. So hopefully they're going to do more of that going forward. Hopefully they're going to do more of that going forward. So does anybody know of my audience? Does any of you know Ken Stone? Does anybody know him? You mean workspace organization. I mean a floating palette. I can move it anywhere I want on the screen. I'd like the inspector to be that. I like it to be a floating palette, especially the inspector, because that's where you make a lot of adjustments. And right now it's stuck all the way up in the corner and you can't move it. No matter where you're working, you can't move it. I'd like to be able to see the inspector come around like a floating palette. Yes, his web pages. Yes, Ken Stone. So Ken had the best Final Cut Pro dedicated website, better than anybody else's. And when he stopped updating it more or less, because once Final Cut Pro 10 came in, he kind of tailed off on the website. I don't think he was that excited about Final Cut Pro 10. But anyway, I interviewed him for the Final Cut Pro Radio podcast. He was the third person I interviewed, and we're going to play a little bit of that today to hear the conversation we had between Ken and I. So not only was Ken on the podcast, before that, I wrote articles for Ken, for kenstone.net. I know Ken Stone, but lost following him after I jumped full speed in Final Cut Pro. Well, he also stopped the normal pace of articles when 10 came out. I talked with him not only for the podcast, but whenever I would do an article, he and I would get on the phone and talk about if he wanted to change something or if he had a question about something. And so we talked quite a bit on the phone. I never met him in person, but we talked quite a bit on the phone. I would say probably a dozen separate times. So Compressor got updated. 4.11.1. I'm expecting the .1 for Final Cut 11.2.1 to come out, I would say maybe next week or the week after. Once you get into December, everybody's on vacation, so if it doesn't come out the first couple weeks of December, it's not going to come out until after New Year's. It's not going to come out until after New Year's. I don't remember how I got involved with kenstone.net. I guess I just was looking up an article or two for something. I had a question about Final Cut Classic, and his website came up, and then I was, hooked on it. It's a great website. It's actually still up. The website is actually still available. Let me pull it up. kenstone.net. Did I spell that wrong? Yes, I did. I have an R in there. What the heck is that about? Here we go. So this is the website. His website is still up. You click on here and you get all the articles. So you have Final Cut Pro, editing, effects, white papers. This is all pretty much outdated at this point. But I want to show you one thing. So look, the last Final Cut Pro 10 article was 10.1.2. That's how long ago this was last updated. But I'm going to show you one thing. The very first Final Cut Pro 10 article, Final Cut Pro 10 rundown, was by me. I did the very first article. I did this article before Final Cut Pro 10 came out. This article was in May 16th, 2011. And this Final Cut Pro 10 came out in June the 20th, 21st, 2011. So this is over a month before Final Cut Pro came out. So I did the very first article on Final Cut Pro 10 on kenstone.net. But he has tons of stuff. Look at all these articles are linked. It's mostly linking to articles. He wrote some of his own. I wrote a lot of them. Look, remember Soundtrack Pro? Look at all these articles he has. DVD Studio Pro, a wealth, Compressor, iDVD, Motion, Color, QuickTime. Remember, Final Cut used to have a app called Color, which was specifically for color correction. So anyway, that is his website. That is his website. Clayton Moore says he remembers that. I worked at Apple when Final Cut Pro... Oh, that's interesting. I worked at Apple when Final Cut Pro 1 was released. I still have my Apple internal copy. You mean Final Cut Pro 1.0 or Final Cut Pro 10 1.0? Or it actually wasn't. You must mean 1.0 because Final Cut Pro 10 was 10.0. It was never a one version of Final Cut Pro 10. Yeah, I was a trainer for Final Cut Pro. Yeah, 1.10, 1.0. I was a trainer for Final Cut Pro Classic. I was an Apple certified Final Cut Pro trainer for the classic version. I think I got started in Final Cut Pro 5. Went to New York, took the classes, took the exam, passed the exam at the sessions, the classes, and 2 people out of a dozen or more, no, 24 people passed the exam. I passed it, and some guy from Canada passed it. Everybody else didn't pass it. It says, I'm a level 2 Apple certified trainer for Final Cut Pro 5, 6, and 7. What does level 2 mean? Level 2 was just a more advanced version than level 1, but that stopped with Final Cut Pro 10. They didn't do it with Final Cut Pro 10. They did it with 5, 6, and 7. Level 2, you got level 1 first. Level 2 was more advanced. So level 2 was more advanced for the classic version of Final Cut. But I went to New York, Apple headquarters in New York. The company I worked for at the time paid for everything. They paid for my transportation, hotel, food, all that stuff. But when I got to Apple headquarters, first off, the person was late. So the class is there in the classroom. They took us up, but the guy that was teaching was late. I'm not sure what was going on, but he was not a Final Cut Pro guy. He was the guy that wrote the Xan books for Apple. I forget what his name was. But he didn't know Final Cut Pro that well. I knew more than about Final Cut Pro than he did. And as a matter of fact, I showed some things that he didn't know how to do. And during the class, I said, let me show you how to do it. And I went up there and showed him how to do it. I forget what his name was. But anyway, he was not a Final Cut Pro guy by any stretch. He was an Xan expert, but he was not a Final Cut Pro guy, which was kind of disappointing. But anyway, 2 of us passed the exam. I became a trainer. Was that a trainer class? Yeah, that was a train-to-trainer class. Yes, it was. So I was a train-to-trainer class. That was a long time ago. A long time ago, absolutely. Congratulations, that was a long time ago, not recent. But anyway, so we're going to talk about Ken Stone a little bit. Let me go over there, and let's look at Ken. This is the podcast. Now, in the early days, let me unmute. In the early days, I actually edited my podcasts in Final Cut Pro. I know a lot of people still do that, but I don't. I, for the most part, edit audio in Logic. But in the early days, I'm not even sure, this was 2012, 2013, when I started Final Cut Pro Radio. But I'll just play a little bit of this. Let's see.
Yeah, Richard.
Hey, Ken.
Yeah, you're going to edit this, right?
Yep, I'll be editing it.
I don't know how interesting this interview is going to be, but anyway.
Oh, I think it'll be quite interesting, Ken.
So anyway, hopefully you've got a nice set of questions.
Yep, I certainly do. We haven't spoken in quite a while since the very early days of Final Cut Pro 10.
Yeah, one thing that's happened, too, is a little bit that the community has moved a bit more towards video education as opposed to the written articles. And, of course, I'm a writer and not a videographer.
You mean video tutorials versus the written article? Well, regardless, you still have a very thorough knowledge of Final Cut Pro.
Actually, I'm a still photographer.
Right, so are you still doing photography?
No, I shoot everything from 35 millimeter medium format and 4x5. I had a big, huge black and white and color darkroom facility. When the digital age came in, it really kind of changed everything because, as you know, everybody's got a camera on their smartphone. And
So we'll play a little bit of that. I've got about I think the podcast was probably about close to an hour. I edited it down. But anyway, Ken was a really interesting guy, and the Final Cut Pro community in those days really owed him a debt of gratitude. Working at Apple and witnessing the desktop video revolution was pretty amazing, historical, and it changed everything. It certainly did. So, Clayton, did you ever have did you ever have the opportunity to interact with Steve Jobs? Because he's the one that really pushed Final Cut Pro and the DV revolution. He was the one, FireWire and all that stuff. Steve Jobs was instrumental in getting that started. Did you ever interact with him at all? Email only, he says. Oh, very interesting. So the very first Apple Store was in Virginia, opening, and Steve Jobs, I was going to go to it. Steve Jobs was there. He was at the very first Apple Store opening in Virginia. But I didn't even think, well, this is the first Apple Store. Probably Steve Jobs is going to be there. And he was, and I missed it because I didn't go. I was working in D.C. that day, but I didn't get a chance to go. I've been there many times since then, and I have met Steve Wozniak. he came to Maryland for an Apple event one time, and I met him. So very, very interesting. So we are going to have more information. I'll play more Ken Stone interview in a little bit. We are going to have more information about the Creative Summit in December. So 2 or 3 weeks, we should hear more. They're not going to tell us a whole lot, but they're going to tell us something, that's for sure. They're going to tell us something. Let's check this out real quick. Not much happening out there. Not much happening out there. Except leaves, 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 and more leaves. People always ask me, they say, what's going on with all the leaves? Why do you, some people say, why don't you just leave them on the ground? Well, I can't. There's way too many leaves for that. Some places, the leaves get up to 2 feet thick. Let me see if I can, hold on a second. Let's do this. Come on. Here we go. So let's look at this real quick. I'll show you what I have to deal with. That's why I need major equipment to do the leaves, because the leaves will actually literally be 2 feet thick. It actually, it's incredible. It'll be 2 feet thick. Just checking something here. Something is hitting my eye. I'm not sure what it is. Yeah, that's a little better. So, what else is going on? So, I don't expect anything to be happening before we get news about the Creative Summit in November. I will expect Final Cut Pro 11.2.1 to come out as a bug fix before they take vacation take off for the Christmas holidays. I don't know of any specific bugs. I've seen a few reports, but I'm sure they got some things they can optimize and make better. So hopefully we'll get that out, because the weird thing is this. So we got our update for after the iPhone came out, the iPhone 17 Pro and Pro Max with ProRes RAW, which I really, really like. But if they're going to wait till spring for any new features in the world of Final Cut, that's way too long. 6 months with no new features. So one of the things that happened was they changed the date of the Final Cut Pro Creative Summit. It used to be November, and they didn't tell us till August or September that they weren't going to have it this year. They canceled the Final Cut Pro Creative Summit for 2025. Instead, it's going to be in the spring of 2026. Well, if you look at the release of Final Cut Pro 11.2, even though it had features, it was mostly involving ProRes RAW and the iPhone 17 Pro and Pro Max. That's not a good enough update for a Final Cut Pro Creative Summit. It's not. It's not big enough for the general audience. So I think we would have been dissatisfied if 11.2 came out at the Creative Summit in November. I mean, I appreciated it because I have an iPhone 17 Pro Max. But most people, the millions of other Final Cut Pro editors, maybe would not have. So something bigger in the spring, hopefully. Do you think in December they announce a date for the Creative Summit? They certainly should. That should be the first thing they should tell us, is the date. Absolutely. That's what I'm waiting on. Everybody's got to make airfare. They got to take time off work and a whole bunch of other things. So something is on my glasses or something. Can I see anything? I don't think I can. Matter of fact, I'm going to clean my glasses. You don't mind, do you? They need cleaning while I'm talking to you. So I expect, listen, they've said they're going to announce something in December for the Creative Summit. Now, the date should be the very first thing they announce. Absolutely, they should be announcing the date. That's what people have to know. That is what people have to know. Is the date. They got to take off work. They got to make arrangements for airfare, other things. That's what they need to know. If they don't announce the date, there's nothing more important than that. They have to announce the date. That's what I like to know. Secondarily, they might have some information about some of the sessions, certainly not all of them, because they change the sessions all the way up to the Creative Summit. Typically, it'll be changing. So we'll have to see. I presume it's going to be back in Cupertino because we want to go to the Spaceship Campus. We've been there twice. We were there in 2023 and we were there in 2024. It's an excellent, excellent incentive to buy a ticket for the Creative Summit. The tickets are not cheap. Last year, I think they were $5.99. They've been as cheap as $2.99, but that was, I'm not sure what the deal was there. 2023, they were really inexpensive. But 2024 was better than 2023 for a lot of reasons. Part of the expense is we were back at the Juniper Hotel, which is an expensive hotel. Not only that, but they gave us lunches every day. In 2023, we got a box lunch. We got a box lunch, which was really, really cool every day. So we didn't have to go anywhere. We stayed at the place. We got a box lunch. Last year, we had a much better lunch. Last year, we had a better lunch at the Juniper Hotel. It was a kind of they had different things, different stations set up, and you just got your own lunch. It was really good. Were you there also when they released the iMac Pro? I've been to every Creative Summit except for the very first one. I've been to every Creative Summit in Cupertino, every single one. How many people are working in the Final Cut Pro team? And if working 100% of their time on Final Cut Pro, why the updates are so slow to appear if only working on Final Cut Pro? They're not only working on Final Cut Pro. The Final Cut Pro team is not a gigantic team. It's limited in size. And sometimes they have to do other things. They have to borrow the team members for other things. So I always say the same thing. I am not going to say that I'm satisfied with the pace of development of Final Cut Pro, because I'm not. It's very, very slow pace of development. And I know all the excuses. I've heard the excuses. Oh, we don't want it to get bogged down. We don't want X, Y, and Z. We don't want this. All these excuses people make for the Final Cut Pro team. The Final Cut Pro team can do their own excuse making. They don't need you to defend them. But nobody is going to say that their development pace is good. It's not. It's very, very slow. They might say they're being cautious. They might say they have to test so many things. Well, Blackmagic is through the roof with development pace. Logic Pro, until recently, they've usually had lots and lots of updates in development, much more than Final Cut. But, you know, if you're going to stay with Final Cut, you're going to use Final Cut, this is what you're going to get. I don't think that's going to change. I think the same pace of development is going to continue. Now, could 11.3 be a giant update like we used to get? We used to get giant updates. When they hit a full point number update, when they went from 10.2 to 10.3 and 10.3 to 10.4, they were giant updates with a whole laundry list of features. 10.4 to 10.5, no, that was a stinker. That was like the biggest thing was, oh, now we're in Apple native silicon. Apple silicon native, I mean. Okay, what about the rest of the stuff? So 11 was good. 11.1 was good. 11.2, which just came out this fall, was not as big an update. It mostly had to do with the iPhone. So 11.3 is hopefully it's going to be a big update with a lot of new features. Hopefully. That's what I'm hoping. What about you? Text-based editing, better auto captions, a role-space audio mixer. These are the things that I'd like to see. I think the next big update will be 3 updates in one, like 10.7, 10.8, and 11 in one update, because the pause is almost as long as these 3 updates took. 11.2 was only an iPhone 7 Pro update, right? I'm just going to say that's probably the reason they delayed the Creative Summit, because 11.2 was not really big enough to host a Final Cut Pro Creative Summit. 11.2 was not big enough to support the Creative Summit. It would have been a letdown from 2024. So I think that's the reason they shifted it. One of the reasons they shifted it to the spring. Randy Ublos was a Final Cut Pro champion. After he retired and left Apple, it's not been the same. What about when Steve Jobs left, when he passed away? That had to change dramatically, although Tim Cook's done a really good job for the Apple, for the stock and stuff. So, and Apple in general, but not necessarily for Final Cut Pro. Steve Jobs was involved with Final Cut Pro with Randy, but Tim Cook has not been involved with Final Cut Pro, as far as I know. Does he have to be? Of course not. No, he does not have to be. It's just an observation. Haven't updated 11.2 yet, but might this week just to archive them all, absolutely. Because once 11.3 comes out, you will no longer be able to get 11.2. So archive what you have, make a backup, a copy of Final Cut that you have right now, and save it. I zip mine and put them in a separate folder. And I also make a copy on a separate hard drive. So it can't get overwritten, whatever the heck's going on there. Let's go back and watch a little more Ken Stone interview. Not that.
In format and 4x5. I had a big, huge black and white and color darkroom facility. When the digital age came in, it really kind of changed everything because, as you know, everybody's got a camera on their smartphone. And the cameras are getting better and better. And there's also, I think, a devaluation of the photograph because it's so easy to take, and people can take 100 and just drop them in the trash. They don't care much about what they shoot. In the old days, when you shot film, it was expensive.
That's very true.
You didn't shoot everything and anything. You shot those things that you thought might, have potential to be a good photograph. And it was expensive and time-consuming to process, and then you had to make the prints and the rest of it. So now, because of the digital, of course, that changes the whole game. And so, like I say, aside from some people who still shoot 4x5 for some process color printing for big magazines, the professional photographic market has really kind of, dried up, just like the film market has.
So, yeah, I like I said, I talked to Ken before I did this interview. This was a recorded interview on the phone for Final Cut Pro Radio podcast, but I talked to him for a year or more when I wrote articles. He would never just take my article and publish it. Never. Never. I would send him a copy. We would always go over the article. If he had a question, he wanted to change the words. Every article I wrote for him, especially the very first one, Final Cut Pro Rundown, he was cautious about some of the things, and he was saying, well, would Apple approve of this? Is there going to be an issue with Apple? Well, I didn't write the article to worry about what Apple was doing. This is public information at the time. I think they need a huge update. Yes. Yes, they do. They really do need a huge update to get them going again because it's been slow. Even though the updates are good, it's been slow. The updates have been slow. Think they need a huge update because that's probably the only way it feels relevant again. If there comes one big update, everybody will write Final Cut Pro is back, small updates lead to Final Cut Pro is dead headlines, yes? Well, Final Cut Pro is not dead. It has 6-7 million users. It's just not as modern in some ways as other NLEs. Other NLEs have really taken off in the last few years. Blackmagic being probably the main one. And the other ones, I don't use CapCut, but people have talked about how good CapCut is for social media. Not only archive Final Cut Pro, remember when by surprise they removed Blu-ray, DVD Blu-ray, even if your own setting with minimal note at the bottom of Compressor update, yes. Any updates you do, make a copy of any important updates, make a backup copy of the app, whatever the app is, before you update. I keep a copy of my Mac OS. People were saying, oh, we can't capture via FireWire anymore. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Just don't update to the latest Mac OS and Final Cut Pro. I have volumes on my SSD, and I do different versions of Final Cut and different versions of the OS. And on both my MacBook Pro and my Mac Mini Pro, M4 Mac Mini Pro, I can indeed capture mini DV tapes from here on out, unless they actually physically break. I'm just not going to update the Mac OS. I have a separate volume for that. I have a separate volume for the latest Mac OS, but I haven't used it for a long time. But I did install it, and it doesn't affect the version that I can capture mini DV tapes on. It doesn't affect it. So, I expect some information with the Creative Summit announcement. They're not going to announce it at Christmas time. They probably the first or second week will get an announcement. It's just going to have some details. It's not going to have all the details. It's not going to have all the sessions. It's not going to have everybody that's going to be there. But it's going to have, hopefully, the dates. These are the dates. Secondarily, I'd like to see it name the location. If it's going to be back at the Juniper, say it's going to be back at the Juniper. And you don't have to worry about getting the hotel reservations because they will have whatever hotel it's going to be at. They will have a block rate, which typically is cheaper than what you can get on your own. So time, the date, the days, and the location would be the first two things that I'd want to know. The sessions and stuff, they will be changed, added to, switched around before the actual summit is happening. So here's three things: the date, the dates, the location, and we're going to the Spaceship Campus. Those are the three things that I want to hear specifically. Those are the three things. Feature droppage is one reason I held on to old hardware. Absolutely. I have an original MacBook Pro. An original MacBook Pro. On that original MacBook Pro, I have FireWire ports. I have Final Cut Pro 7.0.3, and I have Final Cut Pro 10.0. On that original MacBook Pro. It's down here somewhere. I don't use it that often, but every once in a while I'll fire it up. Caesar Darius, a knowledgeable and attentive editor is invaluable. Absolutely. But where did that come from? Are you describing yourself? Are you describing yourself? So when I interviewed for the job at the National Archives in Washington as a AV tech/video editor, one of the things that they said during the interview was, we have an Avid system on a PC. Now, nowhere in my resume did I say anything about Avid, and nowhere in my resume did I say anything about a PC. But I had a lot of editing experience. I was a Final Cut Pro certified, Apple certified trainer for Final Cut Pro. They said, is it going to be a problem with Avid or the PC? I said, no, absolutely not. I said, I know how to edit. All I have to do is just read through some manuals and stuff and see how Avid does it versus Final Cut Pro. One of the things they liked about me was my experience, rather than just coming straight out of college or anything with no experience. I had years of experience. I knew a lot about the Macintosh, a lot about video editing. I knew how to operate a camera manually rather than automatic, and they liked all those things, so they hired me. And I lasted 8.5 years before some things happened. One of them was I got tired of driving into Washington every day, hour and a half minimum each way. An hour and 20 minutes on a good day. I drove down to the subway station and took the subway in, which dropped me off right at the National Archives, right there on Pennsylvania Avenue. 7th and Penn, halfway between the U.S. Capitol and the White House. Every morning I'd get up when I crossed Pennsylvania Avenue. Every morning for 8.5 years, I looked to my left and I could see the U.S. Capitol down at the other end. I did that for 8.5 years. And of course, we had the 4th of July parade there. We housed the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. The Declaration of Independence was the main centerpiece. We had the original Declaration of Independence there. And I got to see that many dozens and dozens and dozens of times. In the rotunda, the Declaration was a centerpiece, and the Constitution and some other founding documents were there. There is one original Declaration of Independence that was physically signed by the founding fathers, and we had that. There were copies made, but one original, and we had that at the National Archives. It's still there. It actually goes down every night into a vault. It's bomb-proof and all kinds of things, some kind of a super vault. I never got to see that. That was pretty high security, but every morning they would bring it up and put it on display, protected, but every night it would go down. It wouldn't stay there. So there's no way Nicolas Cage could have gotten that. You were talking about your articles and discussing changes. That's why I mentioned the value of a copy editor. I thought you were talking about a video editor. That's why I said I'm not sure what you're talking about. Copy editor, yes. Ken was very hands-on with the article. Every article I wrote. No article could I send to him and he would just publish it. Every one, we would talk on the phone. He had questions. He had suggestions to change this, change X, change Y, change Z. So every article that I wrote, probably about half a dozen to 8, I wrote for his publication, his website. And also I wrote for LAFCPUG with Michael Horton. I wrote his articles for Final Cut Pro 10 back in those days. And then when Final Cut, the night that Final Cut Pro was announced, which was April 2011 at the Super Meet, Apple took over the Super Meet. I was in bed, but I woke up and looked on my iPad and saw that they actually premiered Final Cut Pro 10. I got up and got FCPX.TV, the domain name, that night. FCPX.TV is still going, and I based that like on Ken Stone. I linked to a lot of articles. I wrote some of my own, but I have links to articles more than articles that I wrote. As a Dutchman, I saw a copy of the Declaration in Philadelphia. Philadelphia was an important city in the forming of our nation. Absolutely. Most people, I've learned a lot of things when I worked at the National Archives about history. There's a couple of things I'll talk about. Number one is the Declaration of Independence was not signed on July the 4th, 1776. It was not signed on July the 4th. The document that we have, it's hand-scribed on parchment paper, and it's signed by most of the Founding Fathers, but not all, on August the 2nd. That document did not exist. The parchment document did not exist on July the 4th. It was actually handwritten sometime later in July the 10th, 12th, something like that. And then it was signed on August the 2nd by everybody who did the signatures. Thomas, all the people that signed it, Benjamin Franklin, whoever signed it, the Founding Fathers, they signed it. Most of them signed it on August the 2nd, not July the 4th. The Declaration itself, the declaring independence from Great Britain, the Declaration existed on July the 4th, but not the handwritten signed copy. That did not exist on July the 4th. It was signed on August the 2nd. I always thought it was the signing of the Declaration of Independence. It was not the signing. It was just the declaring of independence that July 4th celebrates, not the signing. Not the signing. That's one of the things I learned. One of the other things I learned, I had a friend of mine who was the photographer for the National Archives. He's a friend of mine. His name's Mac. And he came upstairs to my edit suite. I had an edit suite on the 5th floor of the main building in D.C. behind two doors. You had to get one door from the hallway into a vestibule, and then a second door from the vestibule into my edit suite. And he came up there one day and he said, "Hey, do you want to go up to College Park with me? I got to do some photography of the Kennedy assassination memorabilia." And I stopped what I was doing. I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "I have to go up to the National Archives in College Park, and I have to photograph the Kennedy assassination memorabilia." And I said, "Like what?" He said, "Like the rifle that shot Kennedy, like the pistol that shot Officer Tippit, like X, like Y, like Z. The National Archives has all of the Kennedy assassination artifacts." And I said, "You've got to be kidding me." So we got to go up there and I got to see all that stuff in person in the same room. Amazing. It's like a very, very surreal day for me. Very, very surreal. So those are two things that happened. Many other things that happened. We had book authors, TV film personalities, and a lot of politicians. We put on 100 live events a year in the theater. We had a 300-seat theater, and they usually were politicians or book authors or TV personalities. Mike Douglas was down there. I got to meet him. J.J. Walker from Good Times. I got to meet him. Steven Spielberg was down there being interviewed by Ken Burns because he got an award or some kind of an award, and they presented it to him at the National Archives. So I got to meet those people. It's just amazing, amazing times. Amazing times. I just got tired of driving down there. It's too much driving. I got tired of sitting in my RAV4 and driving all the way, part of the way, and then the whole getting on the subway and off the subway and stuff. I just got tired of it. There's other reasons too, but I ended up quitting. But that's one of the main reasons. Great job. Great job. I really enjoyed it. So, what do you think about an update to Final Cut Pro? Anybody have any favorite features they'd like to see in 10.3 in the spring? Do you have any predictions about a feature that you'd like to see, or do you have any predictions about what we're going to hear when they announce something about the Creative Summit 2026? I have my suspicions what's going to happen there. I would say the chances of it being at the Juniper Hotel, 50-50. They could find a cheaper place in Cupertino. I would say the chances of it being in Cupertino are very, very high because that's the only way we can go to the Spaceship Campus. And the Spaceship Campus is a very, very big draw to buying a ticket for the Creative Summit. Spaceship Campus, you can't buy a ticket like you can buy a ticket to go to Disneyland. I'm going to buy a ticket to go to the Spaceship Campus. Can't do that. It's not the way it works. But if you buy a ticket for the Creative Summit and we go to the Spaceship Campus, which is a phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal place. It's gigantic. And it's very, very special. So those are I would say it's going to be in Cupertino. We're going to go to the Spaceship Campus. It's going to be Final Cut Pro 11.3 Or if 11.3 comes out between now and then, it'll be 11.4, whatever. The numbering system is wacky. I don't have any faith of any numbering system working anymore. It's just whatever they feel like doing. They just throw stuff up in the air. Let's call it this. And they pick one of the pieces up, and that's what they call it. I need better audio mixing and better color tools. I agree with both of those. Audio roles-based mixer and Final Cut Studio going forward. Allow me to say for the 100th time that text-based editing is a glaring omission. 100% agree with you. We've had text-based editing for 2.5 years. Avid, Premiere, DaVinci Resolve. Premiere and DaVinci Resolve had text-based editing 2.5 years ago at NAB. And we still, I mean, yes, you have lumberjack systems. I'm not talking about that. That's available. It's been available since, I think, 2017, Phillips said. I'm talking about native text-based editing. Maybe it will be Final Cut Pro 26. I guess it could be, but it would be if it came out in 26, it would be Final Cut Pro 27, right? Because they name it the year ahead, not the same year that it comes out. They could name it anything they want. So I'm just saying the different point numbers used to mean something specific. They threw that away since 10.5 came out, since Final Cut Pro 10.5 came out. Let's listen to a little more Ken Stone. Where is he? Here we go.
The film market, for sure, for exactly the reason you're talking about, because of the expense.
Yeah.
There's so many things you can do with digital that you can't do with film, but the quality of film is superb.
Mm-hmm. The other thing, too, is the fact that because you can make so many repairs in Photoshop and Pixelmator and the rest of them, people don't take as much care or don't understand the science. The exposures can be off. Well, you can adjust your contrast. You can color correct. You don't need to put color filters on front of the lens anymore. So in a way, it's good, that you have more control over it. But in a way, it's bad because people shoot without understanding what they're doing. Most people don't understand about exposure and gamma, color fidelity. So it's kind of becoming like a lost science, a lost art.
Yep, I agree with you. So how did you get started with Final Cut Pro initially?
Well, what happened was, like I said, I started off with Photoshop 22 years ago, all right? And I had a friend who was an actor in New York who saw this product called Final Cut Pro, and he went and took a look at it, and he was kind of amazed. So he told me about it, and I checked it out, and I looked at Final Cut Pro, and of course it had layers. Well, Photoshop has layers. Final Cut Pro had an alpha channel. Well, Photoshop has an alpha channel. Everything I looked at was identical to Photoshop as far as theory goes, and even much of it in practice, except you were dealing with a whole bunch of frames at one time. So for me, and I always did compositing work because I was also a lithographer. So for me, it was a very natural transition. Well, the reason I got Final Cut Pro is I wanted to make a little tiny movie of some of my graphics. And of course, in those days, we're talking 20 years ago or whenever Final Cut Pro first came out, where the QuickTime movies were about the size of your thumbnail.
Right.
And they were terrible. So Final Cut Pro, even though it was DV, it gave us a chance to produce slightly better, QuickTime movies. And that's really kind of how I got started. And I was just fascinated by the process, which is the reason I really learned it.
So that's how he got started. Good old Ken got started in using Final Cut Pro. I want project role selections to carry through to the compound clips. That's a good point. I don't like having to V off everything inside the compound clips to get one language. I understand. Gotcha. Yeah, that would be a good one. There's lots of good ones. Opening a compound clip in place in the timeline instead of now you double click on a compound clip and it takes you to someplace that has no relationship to the main timeline, no physical relationship. You have no idea where you are, takes you to a separate timeline. It's a mess. It's clunky, very clunky. But for me, text-based editing, better auto captions, making captions into subtitles with different, you can maybe apply a bunch of different animations to it. That would be nice. Make it like CapCut style for people that want that. I use that sometimes. Right now, I use either the plugins that BrettFX has in Lumberjack systems, Philip and Greg Intelligent Assistants have, or I go to DaVinci Resolve. If I'm going to do text-based editing, I've already paid for DaVinci Resolve Studio. So I open up the video in DaVinci Resolve, transcribe the audio, then I can do complete text-based editing. It's a joy for long form. I don't need text-based editing for a 3-minute video. I don't need it even for a 10-minute video, but for an hour video, hour and a half, it's the fastest way to do a rough cut. Text-based editing. And then you can also caption everything that you have in the timeline, and then you can apply a Fusion title to the caption track, and then all the captions will come out the same style animation that the Fusion title has. It's very, very cool. I like it. And you can save a preset so you can use it again. And you can save a preset so you can use it again. Joining from Jamaica, Alista, our good old friend Alista, joining from Jamaica. I presume, is it hot there in Jamaica? I presume it is. For some reason, I think of Jamaica being tropical. Seems like it. So in our neck of the woods, a lot of people could see the northern lights this last week. Now, I went outside on the night it was supposed to happen, but it was cloudy and overcast, so I didn't stay up to watch them. Silly question, but does XML import and export window workflow have appear at the same NLE have appear or it have take many years? I'm not sure. So is it import export workflow appears at the same time? I think it appeared. We've had that since Final Cut Pro 7, I thought. FCP XML, import and export. But if you use XML, it's not as robust as saving the library. Library file has more information than the XML file has. Just FYI. And I can save the library file for 2 reasons. Number one, I have FCP backups for Final Cut Pro, which lets me save anything I want, anywhere I want, name it what I want, do it automatically, do it manually. It's $20 in the App Store. It's a really great buy. I've had it for years. The other thing is I keep almost always I keep my media external from the library. So the library file itself is very small, usually just megabytes. So I back up that library file. I don't have to back up a huge library full of stuffed, crammed full of media that's gigabytes, hundreds of gigabytes. No, the media is in a separate compartment in the master folder. I keep one master folder. Inside that master folder is my media. If I have a lot of media, the media is in separate descriptive folders. For example, I film with my iPhone 17 Pro Max. I film with my iPhone 16 Pro Max. I film with my DJI Action 5. I film with my DJI 4K drone. I film with my Lumix S5 Mark IIX. If I'm filming with 2 or 3 of those cameras, each camera is going to have its own master folder inside my main folder. The library is also stored inside that main folder, so I have one folder to back up everything. I just take the one folder and back it up Everything is contained in there. All the media is contained in there. The project library is contained. If I wanted to shoot an XML file, I could put it in there as well. So I have one master folder that I have for all my projects. The more important the project is, the more I organize it. What I mean, Media Composer was the first, but when all others NLE appears, is that what triggered the creation of XML? I don't know. I thought Final Cut Pro 7 had XML, which would have been in the early 2000s. I'm sure it did, it had XML. Yeah, it does, because Premiere uses Final Cut Pro 7 XML. So Premiere uses it. I don't know what triggered it. It's just a way they got information in and out of. It's mostly for going across different apps, going from Final Cut to Premiere. XML is the only way that can be done. I get crazy about that relinking. If you put it in another folder or drive, that's something Apple could make it easier. Absolutely, especially nowadays. You open up I'm used to that. So as long as you don't change anything, you have to relink once to that new folder, and then everything's linked. It usually doesn't become unlinked. I don't use the import window though, but I do everything in the Finder. I organize it, keeps the library file very small, makes it easy for the library file to be backed up. Super simple, because the library file contains more information than the FCP XML file. How much? I don't know, 5%, 10%, 20% more? I don't know, but it contains more information. The XML file is more bare bones. The Final Cut Pro library file has all the information, all the edits, plus more than the XML file has. So I use the library file. But my media is external. I'm not letting my library balloon into 50 or 100 gigabytes or whatever. I'm not going to let it do that. Library file, small. Everything's inside of a single folder. So it's drop dead simple to back up that one folder containing everything. I don't have media here and media there and all that. Everything is in one master folder. So that's just the way I work. That is the way that I work. Let's go back to Ken for a little bit.
So you said you don't consider yourself a videographer.
No, and I'm not an editor either. I've edited little independent things and student movies and the rest of it, but I'm not a real editor. I never claimed to be.
And yet you have a very thorough knowledge of Final Cut Pro.
Yeah, and again, that goes back because of my knowledge of Photoshop.
So you related Final Cut Pro 7 or Final Cut Pro Classic to Photoshop?
Well, I started off with Final Cut Pro 1, and it was very, very much like Photoshop. You could resize your frame, you could adjust the color. We did color adjustments in Photoshop. Like I mentioned, having an alpha channel and overlays and layers, making selections. I used to make selections by cutting out rubylith, which was a piece of acetate with a red color tint on it that you cut away with a razor blade to allow light to go through, which is masking and matting.
Okay.
All that stuff I've been doing in Photoshop for years. And that starts to get into part of the issue with what happened when Apple abandoned legacy Final Cut Pro 7. The fact that the code in Final Cut Pro 7 was so very, very old, going back 20 years, and it couldn't access and make use of all of the new facilities we were getting in the Mac. So they knew at one point that they had to really update it, and I think they really tried for about a year to rewrite the code and just realized that they couldn't do it, which is why they ultimately wound up by pushing out Final Cut Pro 10, the first version, which of course should have been a beta.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. How did KenStone.net get started? I presume it was with photography.
Yeah, what happened was I was going out to Two-Pop, where Ralph Fairweather was, and Charles Roberts, and a couple of the other people who really were into video. And I would go there to get help, and I noticed that a lot of people were having trouble creating titles in Photoshop for Final Cut Pro. So I started answering them. But then I found that after 6 or 8 times, I was answering the same question over and over again. So I decided, well, I'll just write it up. So I wrote up a little article explaining how to do it. So that way I figured I could just point people to the article. And at that time, Two-Pop had come into existence with Larry Jordan, a different Larry Jordan. And Ralph went to work for them. So they said, well, why don't you do a few of these Photoshop articles, and we'll put them up at Two-Pop. So I said, okay, I'll do that. And so I did them, but they didn't put them up. And I was also starting to do a few reviews for some products, and I would send them over to Two-Pop, but they didn't put them up. And after a while, people write and they say, gee, we sent you our product, and you wrote this review, and you showed it to us, and we liked it, but it never came out. So at that point, I had like 20 or 22 of these articles I'd written that were just out in the great ether. So I said, well, I'll put them up at my own site until Two-Pop gets a chance to do it. So I created kenstone.net and put up the articles. Like most of them were really about Photoshop,
right,
and how to do things. And don't forget, we had the square pixel versus the rectangular pixel. So giving people a 1, 2, 3, 4 on how to do it really was, beneficial to the people who, didn't know Photoshop. And it just kind of, Two-Pop never actually got around to putting up the articles. They hired me as their community director, and then I got a bunch of people who were on the board, each one to take a different board to help people out, and that went for a bit. But I was really kind of unhappy that they weren't putting the articles up.
Sure, I can understand that completely.
Yeah. So that's when I started doing my own, and Michael Horton actually went in and took over as community developer, or whatever they called it, at Two-Pop, and was running that there. And then at one point, there was a group of us. It was Michael Horton, myself, Randy Ballas, I think Dan Brockett was here, Kevin Mahanahan was here down from San Francisco.
So there's a little more history with Ken Stone, how things got started. He's talked about Michael Horton in the early days. Apple doesn't make it easy to find missing assets, particularly missing filters effects. Yeah, that could be done better for sure. I'd like all used effects to be included in the library. You can get some of the effects, right? You can save them in at least in the same folder, I believe. You talk many times about the problem Final Cut to Logic Pro via XML workflow, but I think Media Composer to Pro Tools experience some problems too. The problem is you can go from Final Cut to Logic with XML, but you can't effectively go from Logic back to Final Cut via XML because Logic, this is my experience in the past. If they've changed it, they may have changed it. Logic doesn't care about the video. Logic only cares about the audio. So when you do something in Logic and it changes the XML, they don't care about your video XML. They only care about the audio. At least that's been my experience the last time I checked the XML versions. So you can go from Final Cut to Logic, and then Logic, you can't go back to Final Cut with XML. You can export stems, you can export a master file, depending on what you're doing. But Logic is a superior audio application. It's a digital audio workstation. It's superior to Final Cut's ability to work with audio. Final Cut's ability to work with audio is fine for basic audio stuff, but it's nothing like Fairlight in DaVinci Resolve. It's nothing like Pro Tools that they have with the Avid system. A digital audio workstation is more sophisticated audio app, than any native NLE. You have many, many more professional options working with audio with a digital audio workstation. Now, in the case of DaVinci, Fairlight's included, but it still is a digital audio workstation. When you're talking about Avid, well, they have Pro Tools. Pro Tools is by far better than any audio you can do in Avid. One aspect of media management that drives me crazy is that Final Cut Pro will sometimes create an alias regardless of your settings. Yes, it's weird. The default for all assets should be that they're automatically copied. Well, yeah, if you have to watch whether that's a hooked arrow, if you're copying media, I understand what you're saying. It should be selectable, maybe a checkbox. You want a copy or do you want an alias? And you check it before you export. I'd like to reverse the favorite system. Usually you do that in the browser. Sometimes I like to work in the timeline first, but you cannot mark multiple clips in the timeline in bulk favorite. One of the things that I have on my FCPX top 100 list for Final Cut Pro is a clip logger. So the idea is when you're working with clips in the browser, the timeline's not being used. Yes, you can do some things in a browser. I find it clunky. I would like it that you can turn the timeline into a clip logger, exactly what you're talking about. I click on a clip or clips, and I can do things in the timeline that will reflect the browser. I can select a favorite region. I can put a marker in. I can do whatever things that I do in the timeline. It wouldn't be a timeline. It would be a clip logger to log clips in the browser. Because I find myself using the timeline. I find it much easier to do things there than film strip view that goes from one layer to the next up in the browser. I do it in the timeline. So the way I get around that is if I do a favorite, you can't favorite in the timeline at all, but you can set markers. And then if you Shift F to go back to the browser version of that same clip, then you can set a marker in the browser because the playheads should be synced up. Is Logic Pro better than Adobe Audio for clean audio up and resolution restoration? I don't know. I would say probably Adobe Audio is probably pretty good for that, but you have to pay every month. You can only rent it. You can never get a full version. I paid once for Logic Pro, and I've never paid another penny since then. In the library, an alias is initially created before the files are copied to the library. If interrupted, it's supposed to resolve the incompletes and next open from the aliases. Yeah, there's some improvements that can be done in Final Cut as far as media management goes. They know, the Final Cut Pro team knows about all the improvements we'd like to see. They have their own list of things they'd like to do. Now, as they said at one of the Creative Summits, yes, they hear the complaints about the slow pace of development, but they know Final Cut Pro the best, and they will be updating it based on their inside knowledge, which I understand, but it doesn't mean we can't say we'd like it to be developed faster, because we can. We absolutely can. I think you have a spectral editor in Adobe Audition, which is amazing, yes. Digital Performer, I have Mode 2 Digital Performer. It's got a spectral analysis. But I think Logic Pro is better in almost everything other than that. Yes, always use Consolidate, absolutely, for your effects and things. But I keep everything inside of a single folder. Master folder, libraries in there, all my media is organized the way I want it. I can rename it before I create a library. I don't rename it after I make the library. You guys are coming up with some great ideas. The settings in the browser should be preserved, safe for each individual library. For example, selecting favorites in one library should not carry over to a second library. You guys, yeah, the settings should be in the browser. There's a lot of things. How many times, every time I open a new timeline, I have to go to the view menu. I have to set the icons the way I want. I got to set the waveforms the way I want. For 13, 14 years, I've been doing that, manually adjusting the timeline the way I want. Why can't Final Cut Pro, as smart as it is, I keep hearing about how great a database it is, can't remember how I want my timeline? Give me the option. I've done it 13 years. You would think by now Final Cut would know, hey, this is the way that Richard wants his timeline. Let's give it to him. Icon size, waveform size, etc. I always consolidate, especially when converting from 7 to X with XML. Archive copies are always consolidated. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I do what I've done is I got LTO 9 Pro LTO drive, and I have everything backed up on LTO 9. I know LTO 10 just came out, but I got LTO 9, which has worked very, very well. This is not the only thing I'm backed up on, but this is my main backup. I also everything that goes on one of these is backed up to at least one spinning HDD, H drive, and backed up in Backblaze. So 3 copies, minimum. But I like this. This works really well. It was a bit of a pain to get started. I had a lot of problems. I had to send the drive. I got a Simply Pro LTO drive. I had to send it back to England to get it fixed right from the get-go, the first month. It was a real, real pain. It was defective. Now, they took care of it. They took care of the shipping. I shipped it out on a Monday. They had it back to me by Friday with a new drive in it. And they paid for it. So I'm not complaining about that, but still, it was not a good way to start my journey on LTO. It was not a good way to start my journey on LTO.
And we're all sitting in my kitchen drinking my beer, and Kev says, gee, you know, I started the first Final Cut Pro website. You know, and he said, why don't you guys do one down here? And Michael and I looked at each other, and a little light bulb went off. And the next day I knocked out a quick little website, and that's how LaughsyPug got started.
So your first Final Cut Pro website was actually LaughsyPug?
Well, no, actually mine was up first.
But did you have the Final Cut Pro component to it?
Yeah, that's all I was ever about was Final Cut Pro. But all I was doing was putting up articles. And Michael wanted the discussion board, you know, and to be more kind of universal. So that's why we created the site.
That's very interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah.
So why no advertising on kenstone.net?
Well, I started off, I was, you know, earning my living doing other things. And I viewed my site as being like a public library. You know, the old line, light one candle. It's better to light one candle than curse the darkness. I just enjoyed putting the articles out and helping people. And everybody was trying to get click-through ads and banners, and they were also very ugly. They still are. You know. So I just decided that this was going to be kind of like a hobby for me, that I wasn't going to try to monetize it, and that I would just put the articles out for the people, and if, you know, if they were successful, then I would continue on with it.
I don't see any activity in the backyard. I don't see any activity in the backyard. It looks kind of quiet, doesn't it? It looks kind of quiet. All righty, so compressor was updated. Compressor was updated. Final Cut Pro was not updated. Motion was not updated. I hope they have something good for it. I'm sure they have something good for us with 10.3 or whatever they're going to call the next major update to Final Cut Pro. Let's call it the Creative Summit 2026 version of Final Cut Pro, because there's no sense in having a Creative Summit without a major update to Final Cut Pro. Okay? It just doesn't make sense. Everybody expects a major update to Final Cut Pro when there's a Creative Summit. That's one of the things. Listen, the Creative Summit is phenomenal. You get to meet people you see online all the time. I mean, I'm there every year. We get to have lunch together, breakfast together, coffee together, whatever you want. Did I say 10.3? I meant 11.3, yes. Final Cut Pro 11.3 in the spring of 2026 is what I'm saying. If they put out 11.3 between now and then, it'll be 11.4. It'll be version 12, whatever they want to call it. The names don't mean anything. Hey, I'm going to call it this. Pick one of these. The names don't follow what they used to follow, so. So I've missed archiving one version of Compressor before this bug fix and improvement. Hopefully it's okay. Hopefully it's okay. So what the heck's going on here? Oh, it's 12:37. We've been on for 1 hour and 36 minutes so far. So, yeah. So I wanted to give it a little tribute to Ken Stone. I'm going to republish Episode 3 of Final Cut Pro Radio Podcast with Ken Stone. I'm going to republish that episode with a little introduction talking about it since he passed away. Passed away at 83 just last week, I believe. If Apple creates a touchscreen MacBook Pro, I hope they bring over the screenwriting and drawing functions from Final Cut for iPad. They most certainly will. Number one is they already have a touchscreen MacBook Pro in Cupertino. They've been working on one for years. It's more about how they're going to do the operating systems, because one of them is based on a keyboard and mouse and one is based on touch. So they have to incorporate the touch-based things into the keyboard and mouse-based things. I am not going to update my MacBook Pro. I have a 2021, the M1 Max is completely fine. I use it for my third monitor. When I travel, I use it. A touchscreen MacBook Pro would be tempting at that point, whether it's an M5 or an M6, whatever the heck it is. But for one thing I want to do before we get off here is want to congratulate the Final Cut Pro team. Not on your development pace. No, just going to congratulate you for getting us 11.2 this year. Excuse me, I got a hiccup. That's what I wanted to congratulate you on, for doing that. Looking forward to the Creative Summit 2026. Hopefully it's 11.3 at that point. Let's see who's watching, where they're watching from. A lot of people on X, as usual. If you're on X, just shoot me a note. I know Buddy is on X, of course. Surely the touch interface carries over when an iPad is used as a display. What's going on here? There we go. I can't remember. I've used the iPad as a display when I stream live from Cupertino. I don't remember how the touch thing works. I'll have to think about that. Because last year I brought my iPad Pro with me with my MacBook Pro. It's fantastic to have an extra screen real estate because I'm used to big screens when I live stream. But just having a MacBook Pro screen, I'm like, oh, I got this. Where did I hide this? Now I have things on the iPad Pro screen. And it works really well. It works really, really well. I don't know. I can't remember. If I used the touch screen. But anyway, it's slow time for Final Cut Pro, except for the Creative Summit news coming. what is this? The 15th. So we got 2 weeks before December. They said they're going to make an announcement in December with some information. With some information. The dates is what I like to see. The location, Cupertino at a hotel. At least tell us it's in Cupertino again. And tell us we're going to the spaceship campus. Those are the 3 things that I'd like to hear. The sessions you can trickle out over the next 3 or 4 months. But dates, give us the dates, give us the location, at least the city location, and give us that we're going to go to Apple Spaceship Campus again. I saw the Google foldable phone at Best Buy. I was very impressed by its size and seamless screen. Looks great for mobile editing. Apple has their work cut out for them. They're already working on a foldable phone. So that's not a main thing for me because I use my phone as a camera. So I don't need a foldable phone to shoot video with. And I keep saying this, but I'll say it again. I really like ProRes RAW. I never shot in ProRes. I did shoot in log. I never shot in ProRes hardly at all. ProRes RAW, I shoot some of the times. And I use this tiny little SSD, 2 terabytes. I show this 2 terabytes. Let me see if I do this right. Yeah. 2 terabyte SSD. Is this the way it goes? Which is phenomenal. 2 terabyte. Hooks into my phone like that. 2 terabyte. And it has a audio interface, USB-C interface for audio, Pro Audio, and it has power pass-through in this one device. It's much better than the Lexar. The Lexar requires a separate docking station plus the SSD. This has put the docking station inside the SSD. I can have Pro Audio for my audio system, USB-C, and I have power delivery right here. So it solves all the problems. Look how small it is. 2 terabytes. Phenomenal. This is when I record ProRes RAW, this is what I use now. I might sell my Lexar system because it's big. It's too big and bulky compared to this. This is 2 terabytes. Fantastic. The only thing it doesn't work on any of the new gimbals. The new gimbals, their arm's too short, and this hits when the gimbal goes down. The only gimbal this works with right now is the Insta360 Flow 2 Pro. Their arm is longer, and it goes by. But the 3 of the new gimbals that are out, the new DJI, the Hohem something or other, and some other brand, they shortened the damn gimbal arm and it hits this. And they can't be used with an external SSD because the gimbal arm's too short. How many people have external SSDs on their phones? A lot of people. They can't use those gimbals. It's completely poor insight on how to design a gimbal. Insta360 so far is the only one that has the longer arm, and I'm hoping that their new version 3, has the same length arm, because if it doesn't, I'm sticking with the 2. Might be a market for external sensor arms. I don't know why they did that. They shortened the arm up, not even thinking about these external SSDs. Everybody's got an external SSD. Everybody. I use this on my Insta360, no problem. I can record ProRes RAW on it. If I take it out of the case, I can record ProRes RAW and have my Pro Audio plugged in here, my Hollyland Lark Max 2 iPhone transceiver plugged in here so I can record ProRes RAW, and I can record 32-bit audio into my phone. Into my phone. It's incredible. Inside this little 2 terabyte SSD. Fantastic, everyone. All righty. I think I'm going to head out for today. I don't anticipate, Final Cut Pro 11.2.1 could come out at any time. If it comes out, it's probably going to be a few bug fixes. I'll come back on live so we can talk about it. Next, it had to come out this week because the following week is Thanksgiving week in the U.S. People are on vacation. They're not working. A longer arm would reduce the supporting mass. You can't use an external SSD. I don't care about I don't want a short arm. I don't want a short arm. It's ridiculous that they did that and not think about the external SSDs. Every time I see a review of these new gimbals, I chime in there, you can't use an external SSD on any of these gimbals. There's hundreds of thousands of these external SSDs, maybe millions, different brands. You can't use anything external that goes to the back of the phone on any of these gimbals. On any of these gimbals. Make the motor stronger. Make the motor stronger. That's all. You can't increase the strength of a motor from one year to the next. That's just poor planning on gimbal manufacturers. They're like, I hope nobody notices. I hope nobody notices that you can't use external SSDs. Every review I see, I chime in on YouTube and say you can't use external SSDs. You should tell people that. A lot of them didn't know. Another informative discussion. Have a great weekend. Thank you very much. You, audience, is the best Final Cut Pro live audience of any Final Cut Pro live stream. So we'll be back next Saturday. If we get blessed with Final Cut Pro 10.1, 11.2.1 this week, we'll maybe come back and just do a quick during the week, but I really don't anticipate that necessarily happening. And then we'll wait for the discussion about the Creative Summit in December. That's what they promised. So hopefully we'll get that. All right, everyone, I'm going to get out of here, get back to my normal Saturday stuff. Do you guys have any questions? Do you have any comments about Ken Stone? We'll do one more quick Ken Stone video.
As soon as you monetize something, start to make money, okay, every day you go and you check your unique visitors.
Right.
Now you're trying to make money off the site, right? So if you go and one day you have 200 visitors, and the next day 300, the next day you only get 100, now you start to worry, my money's going to go down, my income's going to go down.
Right.
And so the reason for creating the site in the first place, it's changed. It's morphed into something to make money, and that was never my intention.
So do you make a living now with photography?
Well, no, I'm 73 now, so I'm semi-retired. I make some money. I still do some consulting work. I do a little bit of photography and some writing. No, I don't really need to earn a living anymore in that sense.
So that was 10 years ago, because I think he just passed away at 83. So that was 10 years ago when we interviewed Ken Stone for Final Cut Pro Radio. I'm going to redo that. I'm going to put that episode 3 version up in the next week or so people can hear the whole interview on Final Cut Pro Radio. Ken was a big influence on me. He's a big influence on a lot of the early adopters of Final Cut Pro. And he was a very, very, very nice guy. I talked with him over a dozen times over the years, mostly for articles. We would review articles. He would always want to talk about them before he published them. There was always changes or suggestions about it to change this and change that. So, Ken, I really miss you. And I hope you're doing well on your journey in your next life. Thanks, everybody. See you later, and I'll have the Ken Stone video up on Final Cut Pro Radio, hopefully within the next week or so. Talk to everybody later. Thanks for tuning in.